So Denise Smith, thank you very much for joining me here this afternoon. We've had a wonderful setup to get our Zoom all ready, and we're going to dive in. Before I go too much further, I just wanted to ask you to introduce yourself in whatever way you would like to.
Okay.
I'll put myself on mute. We can always restart, but go for it. Okay, let's try that again. Denise Smith, thank you very much for joining me here this afternoon. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And before I go too much further, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself. We might giggle a little bit, but it's fine. We'll get past that. I'll edit this or something, but please tell us a little bit, whatever you feel like doing by way of introducing yourself.
All right. Well, I am an older adult. I think the correct term is these days. Retired, mother of 4 very adult children.
Most of the time.
Well, not their behavior, just their age. And living in a multi-generational high-rise apartment building in Midtown Toronto. Not far from the hospital I was born in, although I've lived in several other places in between. I have had a varied career in healthcare and in parenting and in working in a bookstore and as a volunteer. And I have reached a stage in life where my life is mostly revolving around grandparenting and volunteering, as much as my physical ability allows me to do. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you. And since I know a little bit about what you're volunteering in, I might just nudge you to say a bit about that volunteering, because I think it's going to be really relevant for this conversation.
Okay. As I mentioned, I'm living in a multi-generational high-rise apartment. This building has a fairly high percentage of older adults, and as such has been identified as a NORC, N-O-R-C, which is a naturally occurring retirement community, meaning that just by natural gravitational pull, a large percentage of the residents in these 2 high-rise towers are older adults. And having been identified as that, we have become part of a model of living in place, or aging in place as the term has become, and are part of a research study. And we have developed some programming and social activities to help keep people connected to people in the buildings, to help provide physical and emotional and theoretically nutritional support, although of course the pandemic has interfered somewhat with that in that for the past 2 years, most of our social activity has by default been via Zoom. Which I will say we're very lucky that we have had that. And for those who were not comfortable with it, part of our volunteer group commitment was to help as many as possible become comfortable using that mode of communication. And we've managed many socials and discussions and, stitching group and book club and all the types of usual social activities using Zoom. So that's been a fairly big part of my life in recent, especially in the last couple of years, is being involved in keeping people connected.
And that's probably somebody trying to get you right now, because I know you do a lot of hands-on work in the building. So do you need a moment to check
You
in?
will be happy to know I have now remembered to turn off my notification.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. It happens. I know you're in high demand. And I often, I always make a point of disclosing how I'm connected to my interview subjects, because I'm very fortunate to have lots of different people who have agreed to do this because we're connected. So I'll just disclose, in this instance, you are my mother, which may relate to how come we got the giggles starting this interview. But it's not random that I chose to talk to you about this, because I think you'll have really useful perspective. So there's lots more I could say about that connection, but that's not what this call is about. So people know you are my mother. I'm your youngest of those 4 very adult children. And I also like to ask my interviewees if they wouldn't mind saying if they have any commercial relationship with TD Bank. So any commercial relationship with the company that you would like us to know about.
Well, I do bank with TD Bank and have for many, many years. I have bank accounts with them. And that's actually all I have with them, I guess.
Cool.
And yeah, I think that's all I can say about that.
Okay. I do too, which I'm now realizing we got passed down through the generations. So, okay. So
that's like a political party. Banking tends to get passed along in the same kind of style until one figures out maybe that's not the best relationship.
Yeah, unless there's a good reason. That's a big part of why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I feel like it is an intergenerational conversation, this kind of banking industry evolution. So you've kind of given the punchline already, but I'm going to take us through a few questions. So you know a bit about my own work and my stuff in sustainability, ESG, all the stuff that you've helped, proofread and cheerlead along the way. So you've had a lot of exposure just by osmosis to all these terms that get thrown around, the regenerative economy, sustainable development, insert jargony term here. But those I think are useful only to a point. What I find really helpful is to hear in people's own words, what is the future you want? What does it look like when companies and society gets all these things right? And that's a really big question. So there's definitely no right or wrong answer, but as much sort of color commentary as you could put to a future you wish for.
Okay. I have to say, as far as all the terminology around it, I almost always have to look up what the terms really mean. And then I don't think they really mean what they say they mean anyways. But as for what I would like to see, at this stage, I am seeing a lot of disconnect in the world. A lot of things that need fixing that aren't getting fixed, whether it's climate, which is a huge issue, whether it's health, whether it's wealth distribution, cost of living stuff. It's too many haves and have-nots, and too much emphasis on money and things. And I have to say, as someone who downsized from a bigger house to a small 1-bedroom apartment, I realize that there's joy and beauty in living lightly and small. And this isn't small by many people's or community standards, but relative to some of what I experienced in the past, it is small. I would like to see everyone, the whole world, recognize the beauty and value around us of living in better harmony with nature and with other humans all around. We are a selfish race and tend to put too much emphasis on taking rather than sharing. And even giving has become kind of an industry in itself, which is something that irks me in a way, that we shouldn't be being asked to donate all the time, and it gives us a tax credit and all that emphasis. We should be sharing more willingly on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
Many of us do, but not everyone. And the attitude isn't there.
Mm. I knew there was a reason I wanted to interview you. Ermi for president. Oh, okay, back to the script. Thank you. That's a wonderful future. I want to live in that future too. And that very much aligns with the sort of foundational notion of what I'm looking for here. So I'm going to ask a series of questions now that are more about TD Bank. If you want to answer specifically about TD Bank, about banking, about your understanding of, you know, how the financial system does or doesn't function, there's no right or wrong here. It doesn't have to be super specific. The most important thing that I want you to do is hold that future you just described as the kind of thought bubble or the lens. Like, given that future, which feels like a wonderful place to be, and then looking at the bank. So specifically, we're going to start on the positive side. When you think about TD Bank, or if you prefer banking, what activities, what impacts, what anything do you see going on now, aside from the charitable stuff? So this is actually an important distinction, separate from their charitable giving, because that is not how they make their money. So I'm really looking at the business model of the bank. What impacts or activities do you see them having that help create that future you just described?
Okay, I have to say I don't read bank annual reports or anything to really know what they are doing. And I know you said don't refer to the charitable support they provide. I know they do provide a lot of good support to reading programs and all kinds of activities.
You can override my guidance on that if you want. If you feel like that's actually significant and contributing to your experience of that future, that's totally cool. I'm just,
well,
yeah,
they do that, and I want to give them credit for doing that. I am not familiar enough with, you know, how they invest my little bit of money that they have, whether they do it with as great care as I might like. And I'm kind of guilty of not paying closer attention. And nor do they put out anything that other than annual reports, and maybe I don't look hard enough to know how are they helping protect our environment. I have glanced, and especially since I knew you were doing this, at these ESG reports, and it's like way over my head. I haven't got a clue what they're saying. And they, you know, I'm moderately educated, and it's kind of meaningless to me. So I'd like to know what they do and are doing to help, you know, protect our world, and how they invest our money, and what they're doing to influence how things are done. I think banks, I know, have a lot of money, and they seem to always be making profit, from what I understand. And I'd like to think that some of that profit could be put back in, or maybe not even earned initially, by doing things that are harmful to the environment. Other than the reports that I know you used to work on, I don't know who the watchdog is for a bank, or for that matter, for any other kind of company, and who has the authority to tell them or direct them to make better use of all this profit, other than to line the pockets of some of the folks who work for them. Mostly the senior folks. You know, that my everyday bank teller is probably not all that well paid. Very sweet in the bank when I go in, but frontline people are not getting rich.
Yeah, you know, so I have the liberty of having these conversations, and they haven't all been made public yet, but they will be. So the one I just had with Frank McGillicuddy, so anybody following the tapes here, whatever order you go in, you may have already seen this, or you may want to jump over to one of the things he noted, having been having worked in the bank, was that there's sort of 2,000 people at the top that he would describe as overpaid, and he put himself in there. He said, I was paid too much money to do the work I did. which I thought was kind of interesting, right? Like, you know, you don't work there and you sense that that's what's going on. And the teller at my TD bank here just started. I was in there to pay my taxes and she just started. And so she was learning and a colleague was teaching her how to deal with paying my taxes for me. And I said, oh, you just started, you know, she's so young. And I said, oh, what did you do before? Thinking maybe she was in school studying commerce or something. And she worked at Zara folding clothes and then selling, so that you're paid the same, or, you know, it was a bit of a sideways step to go from selling clothes in a retail store to being a bank teller. So I steered you away from the charitable stuff, but maybe just in fairness, since that does sound like it's a place that you directly experience some of what banks are doing, are there specific positive impacts that you are seeing happening there?
Without, I haven't actually delved into this specifically. I do notice when it's a TD logo as a sponsor of something. And I know they're quite generous to our public library, Toronto Public Library, reading programs and whatnot. I really can't go any further than that in specifics, but that warms my heart to think that they are giving some money. Now, how much? I don't know that I would even be able to find that out. And maybe it goes in small pockets in different places. You know, I'm sure they consider themselves to be generous. And I know that by putting their logo out there, it's a little memory, you know, twig for me. Oh, my bank does something good.
Right.
And that's why they do it. And whether or not it's a big amount or not, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So I typically would ask, what about the negative impacts? In a way, you've kind of surfed positive and negative. So I'm just going to sort of re-ask in case there's rocks you haven't turned over. Are there other negative or positive impacts that you believe are either contributing to or potentially undermining that future? And remember that beautiful future you described. And this is just based on your experience of the bank or banking. You know, what's contributing to or undermining that future in your view?
One of the things that comes up in my mind when I think of banks is scams. And that's not in the bank's control exactly. But you know, as an older adult with several of my acquaintances or friends having fallen to the hands of scammers, and I don't know how responsible to hold the banks for this. And certainly when you go into your individual bank with your credit card and your tale of woe, generally the person on duty is sympathetic and helpful. But from the small perspective of an older adult, that is a scary part of the world for a lot of us. And it's not just bank scam. There's a gazillion of them. And some of these scammers are the brightest people in the world who, if they would only put their talents to good use, could do a lot of good. Otherwise, I mean, as far as banks, I hear from the younger generation challenges around mortgages and that kind of stuff, getting credit and school payment support and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on with them that I don't have firsthand knowledge of, but I know they play a big role in our everyday life, and probably me in particular, but most of us don't really know how deep they reach into our lives in general, the control they have over things, whether it's investment in good things that are good for us and the environment, or wherever else they put their money. Our money, it's our money that they're working with when I think about it. And well, you're making me think I should know more about what they do with my money.
most people don't. And, if it makes you feel any better, I've been poring over their financial statements and I'm having trouble figuring out what they do with the money. So you can figure it out. In fact, Frank, that I was just talking to, had a few recommendations for people I could talk to who like specialize in reading that information. So here they are, and it's not, of course, not just TD. This is like all the banks that are disclosing information that they have to disclose. But I'd even say, I was going to say to the average person, I'm going to say you and I are actually not the average people when it comes to literacy, financial literacy. And anyway, that's another challenge. I have to do a little more due diligence to try to follow the money. But that's helpful. I think those are good sort of topics and areas that are important and are sort of swirling around in the mix. So good to hear your thoughts on that. And we can touch on more, but I'm going to actually take us into a screenshot that might spark additional thoughts. I want to hear your reactions to something. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share my correct screen, I think. Let me just see. Do you see?
Where I always hold my breath that I don't show all the things I don't really want to show.
Oh, I know. Well, all I would really be showing is that I have about 8,000 tabs open, but let me just see. Do you see a Google slide that has your name at the top of it?
I do.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to just set this up a little bit and explain what I'm hoping you can help me with. This is a really dumb question that I'm going to ask because I know that it's not really practical to try to put a numerical ranking to something really complex and dynamic. So there isn't really a right answer to this. It's more to listen to how you would kind of puzzle out trying to put it somewhere, even though this makes no sense. So here's what's going on with this 2x2 matrix. There are impacts on both societal health, that's this horizontal line, and ecosystem health, the vertical line. 0 would be net neutral, no real impacts. Everything above 0 would be contributing to that future you described, where 5 on the societal health would be knocking it out of the park, creating that world you talked about where people are looking after each other, we're healthy, caring, sharing. And on the ecosystem side, we're doing all we can to protect and live in harmony with nature because of TD Bank. TD Bank is making this happen. On the negative side, human health is being undermined, sharing isn't happening, all those nice things you described are being undermined because of the bank. And likewise, ecosystem health, anything below the line, the environment is being harmed, ecosystems are being sort of constrained or unable to restore themselves. Based on that very blunt instrument of a ranking or rating approach, where would you tell me to put the bubble that is TD Bank on this matrix? And why will be my next question.
Well, that's very difficult. Well, in my mind, I'd put them on the negative of both dimensions.
One dimension more than another?
Well, they're so interconnected that I would almost, this is just instinctively because I don't know facts to really say, but I would put them both probably equally about 2 notches down.
And so I'm kind of in that 2 space here. Does that look like about the right place?
Yeah, I think. I mean, that's, as I say, I don't have any hard facts to base that on, but that's my general feeling when I think about a bank. That's probably an emotional response to the question.
And do you want to say a bit more about like what kind of impact on societal health do you feel is happening, or ecosystem health? Like what, and knowing, you're saying it's not coming from having just read encyclopedias on this topic, but just share a bit more about what comes up, why you put them there.
Well, society-wise, I mean, for people who are living below the poverty level or whatnot, the banks are not friendly. They're not helpful. And I know they're not charities to support people, but I don't think they smile on you if you are on the lower side of the poverty scale. And nor do they seem to offer much in the way of financial guidance or instruction. There's no shortage of bank and legal support, for making your will and how to set up your trust fund and all that kind of thing. You don't see a lot of stuff coming from the banks on how to subsist on a subsistence income. Is that their role? Well, they're not charities, they're not United Way, but maybe there's room for them to do something there. That's just a thought.
Yep. And what about on the ecosystem side? Any thoughts come to mind there?
Well, I don't know. I guess they invest our money. I don't know how TD invests, as how much is in oiling stuff out west. And I know that's a big part of our economy, and I feel for the people who work in that industry, but there's not a lot of foresight in what's being done, digging up the tar sands and whatnot. It's wrecking the environment and just creating more demand for more oil-based products. I think they need to devote more of their money, their investments, to finding alternatives. And I don't know what they already do invest, so I can't really say, how far off the mark they are. Yeah,
and neither can I, because it's really hard to follow that in their disclosures. They do disclose that they are investing some of their wholesale commercial banking, which is like people like you and I have checking accounts, people get mortgages, they do lots of different things. And they have their wholesale banking or sort of investment banking arm, which is invested in oil and gas, in mining. Although interestingly, and I need to find that financial statements reader expert to break this one down, the majority of that wholesale banking pie slice goes to the financial sector. So it's like, does it just keep going in a circle?
Sounds a little incestuous to me.
That's right. Yeah. Now that could be pension funds. That could be, other like loans and other financial instruments. But in the disclosures, it shows as, you got your mining, you got your oil and gas, you got your financial sector, and financial is the biggest. Real estate is the second biggest. So thank you. I appreciate you humoring that exercise. I'm going to stop sharing here, but really helpful to hear sort of what your gut tells you there and why. And I'm going to swing us into two more questions, and that'll bring us home. And I'm happy to say these two are far more imaginative. You can just make anything up. It's intentionally not based on fact. And the first one actually inadvertently picks up on something you said a few minutes ago. So this just in, I just got a newspaper headline, which is that you have been appointed in charge of everything in the whole universe. You are in charge. There's nothing,
everything in the world,
the whole wide world. Nothing's in the way. There are no barriers, no limits, nothing. And so when you were talking about like who has influence, you have influence. You influence everything now. So with that power, what changes would you make to the company?
Oh, wow. Well, I'd make them put out everything in plain English. Even when you sign up for a safety deposit box, it's a bit of a rigmarole, or a shared account that you hold in trust of $1,000 for a nursing reunion. The forms and the paperwork are, and the language, it's mostly the language. So I would have them change that. I would have them tell me more exactly where they are investing. I'd like to see a list of the companies and what the companies are doing with the money that they are giving them or loaning them. I don't think they're giving anybody anything. Loaning or whatever investing term is. And I'd like to see them share their profits better. not going into, the CEO and all the big executives. I do realize that executives put in long hours and bear heavy responsibility. I don't question that they are worth a reasonable salary, but I do think that some of them are definitely overpaid in the grand scheme of things when they make as much in a week as some people are lucky to make in a year. So that kind of thing. Yeah, I guess that's mostly it. I mean, I'd like them to give away a lot of their money or fund more supportive programs or community centers or senior centers, that kind of thing. There's a huge opportunity. This is an aging population, a great need of things. Investing in buildings and things, I'd like to see them in. There's a huge demand right now, of course, for improvement in seniors, whether it's regular lifestyle or long-term care and all that sort of thing. Sometimes it's not the most profitable field to set up seniors accommodation, but boy, if they've got the money to invest, it would be nice if they put some of it there. There's a huge demand for that. Comfortable, safe, supportive living.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, that was an imagination situation, but so that scenario isn't actually true anymore. But there's another scenario that's almost as good, and which is that this just in. You aren't in charge of the whole universe, but you do have a direct line to the CEO of TD Bank, Bharat Masrani. He takes your calls. He wants to know what you think. He really values your insights and your input. The thing is, he's super busy, as you mentioned. These guys take on a lot of work, so he's super busy. So you've only got 30 seconds. What do you tell him?
Oh, I'd hit him up for some money for our seniors group here. There's all kinds of things we could do right here or in any other, NORC, naturally occurring retirement community, or seniors area, that would make life more comfortable, more enjoyable for older adults. And I'd like him to open more doors. Actually, I haven't even mentioned one of my other soft spots is new immigrants. There's a huge need for more support there. Oh, there's so many things now that I think about it. I mean, my laundry list would include drug overdose prevention, infectious disease control, immigration, seniors issues. There's so many places where instead of putting money into, I don't know what, put it into these good causes. But, I'm kind of biased towards the supporting the underdog, I guess. And I don't see the banks in that milieu much. I'm sure they do some of it, but I don't see that they're there much. So I don't know, did I use up my 30 seconds?
He gave you extra time.
He hung up on me a while ago.
No, he appreciated that you had useful things to say. Now, I'm going to take a creative license here because this is not a question I've asked anybody else, but it occurs to me because I know you getting to be one of your children, that you also have, I think, a unique perspective given your relationships with some of your friends who are First Nations. So I wondered if you had any other sort of words of wisdom or requests in your direct line with the CEO or as queen of the whole universe with regard to our relationships with our First Nations friends and neighbors and the bank.
Okay. Well, I do have many friends in that community and I worked in education in that area. I think we have lots to learn from First Nations people, Indigenous people about the care of the land, the care of the universe, and the care of each other. I mean, the whole approach to life is a much more empathetic all round, less wasteful, kind and considerate. aging in place, I mean, traditionally, that was not a question. And so I think that we can learn a lot from both the elders, and nowadays it's not just the elders. There are many very knowledgeable, not so elder Indigenous people who are returning to the land and recognizing and pointing out to us that we need to open our ears a bit more to what they have to teach us. And across all of Mother Earth, that is the case, not just in Canada, but around the world. There's many examples of lots of good teachings that we could be taking on.
I love it. Those are all the questions that I had prepared for you. Are there other things I didn't ask you about that you wish I had that you want to answer, or anything else you want to say in relation to TD Bank and that one amazing future that you described?
I don't think so. I'd like to hear, I want to hear the end result of this. I'm appreciative of the work you're doing. I mean, as your mother and as a citizen, as a senior, people need to pay attention. I think the whole question that you're raising about how we look at these things is a really good one, because I think we're having the wool pulled over our eyes in the grand scheme of things. Most of us don't even know that. We don't know what's going on. We think, the banks are looking after this and the big companies are looking after this, but I'm not sure that many of us really understand how serious it is and how little is actually being done.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your endorsement and support. And I don't know what will come from this, but hopefully something. And if nothing else, I think the future you described, to be honest, is the most succinct, clear, and visionary of pretty much all the other futures that have been described so far. So hopefully, if not Bharat Masrani, then others in the banking sector will pay attention.
Well, it comes from a mother's heart and mind, right?
We need to know that. Thank you, Mom Denise Smith. Greatly appreciate your time and insights here.
Okay, thank you for asking me. It's just kind of fun once I got into it.
Sorry,
and I'm going to think of all the things I wish I'd said. So maybe I'll have to send you an addendum.
You can heckle in the interwebs. I'm going to stop the recording here since we started with giggling. Hopefully we don't end with too much giggling. I'll stop here.